Welcome to GPOguide.com, session 100.1, Introduction to Group Policy. In this session, I'm going to introduce the group policy technology that was available first in Windows 2000, and essentially group policy provides a configuration management capability for Windows, be it server or workstation, Windows 2000, Server 2003, or XP, and of course in the upcoming Vista version as well. Group policy is essentially a set of capabilities that allow you to configure different aspects of the Windows environment, be it the computer security configuration or the user's desktop configuration. Every workstation, server, Windows product since Windows 2000 came with a local group policy object that was basically specific to that machine and to the users that log on to that machine. In addition, when Active Directory was introduced in Windows 2000, you had the capability of creating group policy objects within an Active Directory environment. And in that case, you could basically create group policy objects that affected configuration of computers and users in Active Directory. Now, the first thing I'm going to go through is some of the tools that you can use to get access to group policy, and then we'll review some of the capabilities of group policy. Let's first look at the local GPO, and what you see on the screen is a Windows XP workstation. I'm going to go ahead and go to the run command and type in gpedit.msc, which is the name of the MMC tool that Windows provides for accessing the local computer policy, the local GPO. Now, as you can see, there are two sides to a group policy object. This is true regardless of whether it's the local GPO or a domain-based one. The computer configuration side, as the name implies, applies to all computer-specific settings. So, regardless of what user may be logged on to this machine, the settings that are enabled under this computer configuration section will apply to this system. And similarly, on the user side, any user configuration settings that you set will be applied to any users that log on to this machine. Now, one thing you're going to notice about the local group policy as opposed to a domain-based group policy is that the number of areas for configuration is somewhat smaller than what's available on the domain-based ones. For example, if we try to expand the software settings node, there's nothing here. Essentially, it's empty. The reason for that is that this software settings capability, which in domain-based GPOs lets you deploy software to machines or users, this is not available under the local GPO. If we go ahead and expand the Windows settings, you'll see some of the other capabilities that group policy provides out of the box. Scripts for startup and shutdown of the computer, so when the computer starts up or when the computer shuts down, you can specify to run certain scripts. And those could be anything from batch files to Windows script host files to even executables. Security settings, in this section is where you'll find the main set of security policies that control Windows security configuration. Everything from user account policies such as password or account lockout to local policies, which include things like audit, the auditing settings on a particular machine, user rights assignment, in other words, who can do what on this system, and then security options, which is a set of vulnerability-related configuration items that you can set or enable or disable on the system. Now, if I go down to the administrative templates section, this is the area that was in place or was available in NT4 with system policy, and essentially what this is a way of setting registry values within Windows based on a set of template files called ADM files. And these ADM files basically were used to build these menus and these containers that you see here and show the options that are available. And as you can see within this section, there's a number of different Windows areas that are supported in administrative templates, so you can configure behavior of various Windows settings, either per computer or per user. So essentially what you have with administrative templates policy is the ability to view what registry values are going to be set and then enable or disable them. And in fact, the administrative template policy has three modes basically. Not configured, which means that this setting is as the name implies, not configured. The registry value is not set. enabled, which means that whatever registry value is beneath this policy will get placed in the registry on this computer. And then disabled. Disabled could mean a number of different things. Disabled could mean that a value is set from 1 to 0. It could mean that the value is removed altogether, or it could mean that the value is some string, different string value. So, enabled is yes and disabled is no. It all depends on what's defined within the ADM file that backs this GPO. So now if we go down and look at the user configuration side, you'll see it's very similar. Again, software settings not supported on the local GPO. Windows settings, various things that you can do, scripts, log on and log off scripts similar to startup and shutdown, but obviously user specific. Security settings that are user specific, in this case only public key policies, which allows you to set policies for the use of public keys. Internet Explorer maintenance is an area where you can configure the look and feel and security of IE on a per user basis. And then finally, again, the administrative templates section to allow per user registry settings. Now, the difference between the per machine and per user registry settings is that any administrative template policy set under the computer configuration node is made against HKey local machine, the HKey local machine hive in the registry, whereas any user configuration administrative template policy that's set is set against HKey current user. So those are the two hives that are available for modification whenever you're using administrative template policy. And you can create custom ADM files that back these, the ones that Microsoft provides, that allow you to modify different registry entries than what is available out of the box. Now, I showed you the Group Policy Editor, which is the main tool for editing group policy objects, both local and domain ones. The second tool I'm going to show you is the Group Policy Management Console, which is available as a free download from Microsoft and is the primary interface for managing group policy in a domain environment. The Group Policy Management Console will only run on XP and Server 2003 systems, but you can manage group policy in Windows 2000 AD environments as well. You simply can't run it on a Windows 2000 machine. You can't run the console, but you can manage those domains as Win2K domains remotely. So the one thing I want to point out about group policy is that it is processed, or the target of group policy processing is users and computers, as I implied by these two sides to the group policy object, the user configuration side and the computer configuration side. Now, that means that only user objects and computer objects will process group policy in a given domain or even on a local machine. However, in a domain environment, you can modify the behavior or modify the targeting of group policy object in two main ways. The first way is by linking a group policy object to a container within a domain. The linking process is indicated here in this Group Policy Management Console. As you can see, this domain called cpandle.com has two GPOs linked underneath it, the test domain GPO and the default domain policy GPO, which is a group policy object that's shipped out of the box with Windows and exists in every AD environment. So these two group policy objects have been linked to the domain in this case. I also have the option of linking group policy objects to either organizational units, such as the domain controllers OU, and if I expand this, you'll see two GPOs here, including the default domain controllers policy that also ships with Windows, as well as my test sec policy. Finally, I can link a GPO to sites, and in this case I have no GPOs linked to my default first site name, but the point here is that if I want, I can link a GPO to be processed for machines in a given site and users that are on machines in a given site. So the linking process allows me to control which users and computers will receive a group policy object. And the way it does that is basically any user or computer within the scope of management for that GPO. In other words, when I'm talking about this default domain policy that's linked to the domain, essentially this is processed by every user and computer in the domain by default. If I want to move down here to the engineering OU and create a group policy here, such as this app deploy 1 GPO, then this particular group policy will only be processed by users or computers within the engineering OU. So you have the ability to scope group policies based on what they do and who your target audience is. The second primary way that you can scope or control the processing of group policy is with security filtering. Now, by default, whenever you create a new group policy object in an AD domain, if I go over here to this authenticated users ACE or access control entry, you'll see that this is given rights to process this GPO. And that's the default setting whenever you create a new GPO. Authenticated users, which includes both user objects as well as computer objects in the domain, will be able to process this group policy. Now, if I wanted to modify this app deploy 1 GPO such that authenticated users did not process this policy, but that a special group within my engineering OU did, I could remove this security filter and add that new group, and then only those users or computers that were in that special group would process the GPO. So essentially what I've been able to do with security filtering, even though group policy objects are only processed by users and computers, I've been able to focus that processing on a particular set of users and computers. So you've seen these two methods for focusing group policy, linking and security filtering. I'll briefly mention one last way that was introduced in Server 2003, and that's WMI filters. Now, WMI filters are a way of basically further filtering a group policy object based on criteria found in WMI. For example, I can set a WMI filter up, as in this example, that only targets machines running Windows XP SP2, and that in that situation, then if that WMI filter is linked to a particular group policy object, then only XP SP2 machines will process it. Okay, now I mentioned that the primary mechanism for editing group policy objects is the group policy editor. That's also true in the group policy management console. If I expand the group policy objects node under my cPanel domain, you'll see that I have a number of group policy objects. And if I wanted to go ahead and edit those, I right-click on one of them and choose Edit, and what you'll see is the group policy object editor comes up focused on that particular group policy object. And just quickly, I'm going to go ahead and expand this, and you'll see that there are some additional settings within the domain-based group policy objects. In this case, I have software installation, which allows me to basically control where software is deployed, to whom or to which machines software is deployed. I have some additional capabilities such as event log restrictions that I can set up under the security area, restricted groups, which lets me control which which users or groups are members of other groups, system services, which lets me set security, startup permission, that sort of thing on services, registry and file system policy, security policy, which lets me set registry and file system security on target machines, wireless network policy, which was a feature introduced again in Server 2003, public key policies, again for X.509 public key management, software restriction policies, which are used to control which executables can run on a given machine, and then IPsec policies. Similarly, on the user side, I've got a couple of new areas that will provide additional functionality, specifically under Windows settings, folder redirection policy, which lets me set redirection of well-known user profile directories to server shares. And then again, on the software settings side, I have the ability to do per-user software deployment. So a little bit of a difference between what's available on domain-based GPOs and what's available on local GPOs. It's also worthwhile to note that there really are no tools for doing things like copying or otherwise managing group policy objects on local machines, the local GPO. So the bottom line is, if you want maximum flexibility, maximum capability, and the features such as linking and security filtering, you'll really need to use GPO in a domain-based environment. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about in this introduction is the concept of resultant set of policy. As I've showed it in this session, you can link a GPO to any number of containers. You can have multiple GPOs within a domain. You can security filter GPOs. You can use WMI filters to control access to GPOs. All of that means that essentially the effective policy that a particular user will have on a given computer can get quite confusing. And for that reason, Microsoft developed something called Resultant Set of Policy, or RSOP. RSOP is a feature whereby you can calculate either modeling in advance or getting results from a system that will be processing a user or a computer that will be processing group policy. So as an example, let's say I want to find out what policy was processed by a particular user on this XP workstation. Within Group Policy Management Console, if I go down to this Group Policy Results node, you'll see I have two group policy sessions that were created on this system. The first one is for the administrator logging on to WS-XP1, which is this workstation, and the second one is another user called B. Evans that was logged on to this workstation. And if I go in and look at this one, what it does is it tells me basically all of the parameters around which group policy objects were processed by this user and this computer, and in actual graphic detail I can see what policies were actually processed, and if there were any errors, this summary tab shows me the errors related to group policy processing, and so I can see whether there's problems or not with the policies with policy processing on this system. And if I go to settings, it shows the actual group policy settings that this computer or user received. You can see under here the computer configuration section and all the computer specific policy that this machine received. And then if I go down, you'll see further down that user configuration setting will show me all the settings that have been applied for this user and what GPO delivered them. So essentially what you get with RSOP, and in this case RSOP results or group policy results, is a detailed accounting of what happened on a particular machine for a particular user who was subject to group policy. Now, the other capability that Windows provides is group policy modeling. Now, I'm not going to go into depth of showing this in this session, but group policy modeling lets you ask what if scenarios around group policy. So if, for example, a user was going to move to a different OU or move into a different group, security group, tell me what the effect might be on that user if they move to that new security group or that new OU in terms of group policy. Will it change some important security or desktop lockdown setting that's going to have an adverse impact on that user's experience? And that's the function of group policy modeling. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that RSOP and group policy results and modeling were not introduced until Windows XP. You cannot collect RSOP information from Windows 2000 systems. Only XP and Server 2003. So most of this capability, this group policy results and group policy modeling, will have to be confined to your XP systems. Now, you can do modeling, of course, of a Windows 2000 target machine, because in that case it's not actually going out and touching that machine looking for the RSOP infrastructure. It's actually using a Server 2003 domain controller to perform the modeling run. So modeling will support pretty much any operating system as long as you have a Server 2003 domain controller in your environment. But group policy results does rely on XP and above. And with that, that ends our introduction of group policy.